Hello, everybody. Hello, and happy Sunday. It is so very good to see you all. And I'm so very, very happy that my lovely co-reader is back.
Hello. I'm so happy to be back.
Welcome back just in time for the holidays.
No, I love the background that you have today.
I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but
Okay.
first I want to know, are you're feeling better and you're all moved?
Oh yes, all good. I moved and I threw my back out, of course, moving boxes and our internet didn't work for a couple of days and all of that, but we're settled now. And I think the only boxes left are in the garage. So that's a good thing. We're feeling organized and sort of settled. And I'm feeling great. I'm feeling really good. Yeah.
Good. Well, congratulations on getting that all done. That same exact thing. I didn't throw out my back with this move, but I definitely had the internet issue. It
You're
took longer than I thought to get my internet worked out, but because I'm like where I do my internet is directly in a dead zone in my house.
right.
So
I know you told me that's I know, so frustrating, right? When you
yeah,
lose your internet, it's like cutting off, your lifeblood.
yes.
We all went crazy. We were like, what? Wait a minute. We can't even function. We have no internet.
It's like I just stare at the wall. It's like being a prisoner or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I celebrate Christmas, so I wanted to have kind of a warm Christmassy feeling, even in the midst of the, distressing topic that we discuss in this book club. But also, today is the first day of Hanukkah.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I do want to wish people who celebrate Hanukkah a happy Hanukkah, but it was also a very sad first day of Hanukkah in Australia. Did you hear about this?
I did. Yeah, it's really tragic.
So my kids celebrate Hanukkah because their dad is Jewish, and this really, really hit me deeply. So for anybody who doesn't know, there was a really horrible shooting in Australia, but I want to show you the hi Sharon. Um, I want to show you this really isn't, you don't see any bodies or anything like that. What you actually see is a hero, a straight up hero in action. This is remarkable. This actually empowered me to know that if I ever find myself, and I, of course hope I don't, and I hope nobody ever has to find themselves in a situation like this, but if we do, this is what to do. Because and this man, I mean, he just was clearly acting out of instinct. And mind you, the person who is uh non-flooding back, oh gosh, that it's so, yes, oh my gosh, flooding, oh gosh. Oh, so anybody, I hope people are staying as safe as possible during any flooding. Your daughter is Jewish. Yeah. This really hit hard. This really, really hit hard. But what's really interesting is that this definitely is being called a terrorist attack.
Mm.
But the person who is doing the saving here, the heroic act, is being carried out by a Muslim on a Muslim. So it is complete heroism. So watch this. Look at this. He completely disarmed him. He just completely ran up on him and disarmed him, and then points, and he ends up getting 2 shots of his own. So I don't know how he got the shots, but let's just keep watching a little bit. So in this situation, there were actually 2 attackers, 2 shooters. One died, and one is hello, welcome people coming in. But I think the one that I'm pretty sure that the one that was disarmed is now captured. But that is absolutely incredible, heroic. And my heart goes out to the families that were affected. There were something like 26 injured and 12 or 11 who died. Let's just watch this guy again. Oh, wow. And apparently the hero there, he had no experience with guns whatsoever. None.
Amazing.
It was just complete instinct.
C'est un malade. Oh mon gros. Oh. Ouais, mais il y a son pote, il va se faire tirer dessus.
Holy crap. And so the man, he was just shooting down on a bunch of people at the beach having a, Hanukkah celebration, first night of Hanukkah celebration. And those could have been any of our kids at that beach, or people or family or whatever at that beach. So my heart goes out to all of them, and I'm just absolutely sickened that we have to keep thinking about this kind of violence happening to any sect of any sect, not just Jews, any kind of religious or political sect. It fucking sickens me. So anyway, I wanted to show you that. So we shall continue with our reading, and I'm very sorry that you were incapacitated, but I'm so glad that you're here to help us continue reading. Why don't you go ahead and start for us?
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, it took me a minute to sort of catch up, but I think I'm caught up to 18, right? Cool. So, okay, we're going to start with 18. Honeymooners. Look, if you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? In the soundtrack of my life, no song better fits the start of my new life with Robbie than Eminem's Lose Yourself, which was released just days after we married. At the beginning of our relationship, still so new to one another, but already completely attached, we must have listened to that song 1,000 times. You better lose yourself in the music. The moment you own it, you better never let it go. Eminem warned us, and we listened. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime, Eminem rapped, and I believed him. Robbie was my one shot, my true love, a gift I had never imagined I'd receive. The day after our wedding, we'd moved out of the Royal Princess and found cheaper accommodations. I also let the massage school know I was withdrawing. I'd loved my brief interlude with ITM, and I had completed 2 of its 5 levels of instruction, but I didn't have enough of my own money to continue. Besides, Robbie wanted to take me on a honeymoon. I think we spent 3 more days in Chiang Mai. Then, after a quick luggage edit, Robbie said I could only take 3 of my 6 suitcases. We set off by train. We were headed to Vientiane, the capital of Laos, 400 miles or so to the east to get my passport stamped.
Robbie was hoping that if we pinched our pennies, we could travel around Thailand for a few months, but my student visa was set to run out in just a few weeks. If I left the country even briefly and then entered again, Robbie had been told, the clock would restart and I'd have more time to explore. So while Vientiane was hardly a romantic destination, that's where we needed to go. When we arrived, tired and sweaty, it was late afternoon. Robbie had warned me that the place was far from picturesque, but I was still appalled by the sight of children squatting and urinating in the streets. Soldiers were everywhere, just waiting to enforce the 9 p.m. curfew. We were so obviously tourists, with Robbie somehow carrying my 3 suitcases and his own big backpack, and I knew we stuck out like sore thumbs. So once we got proof of my visit to Laos stamped in ink on my passport, I told Robbie I wanted to get out of there. We took a boat back across the Mekong River, found a cheap hotel, and slept in Thailand that night. In the morning, we got on another train. Our next stop, about 800 miles south, was Surat Thani, a transport hub where we'd catch a bus and later a ferry that would deliver us to our ultimate destination, Koh Phangan, an island that Robbie and Matt had visited when they first arrived in Thailand. This magical place, one of 3 islands off the southeastern coast in the Gulf of Thailand, was renowned for its monthly full moon party, an all-night celebration tied to the lunar calendar that attracted throngs of tourists. But Robbie promised me that the island was also the perfect place to spend one time, beautiful, peaceful, affordable.
Sitting on a bench in the crowded, rusty ferry boat that took us from the mainland to Koh Phangan's Tong Sala Beach, I was transfixed by the view. The ocean was an unbelievable shade of luminescent blue, and above it, like frosting on a cake, was the lighter blue strip of the sky. A Thai man next to us was carrying a rooster that he had trained to sit on command. Every time the rooster sat down, I burst out laughing. Robbie held me tight with one powerful arm. I was happy. Stepping onto the dock on Tong Sala Beach, we were immediately surrounded by locals, all of them tugging at our sleeves, each more determined than the next to lure us to stay in the hotel he or she was there to represent. One young man handed Robbie a printed business card that said, Two Sons Resort. On the card, handwritten in English, I can get you anything you want. Robbie looked at me and grinned. Two Sons would be our place. For less than $6 a night, we rented a private bungalow 100 feet from the ocean. The resort was run by a family who cooked all our meals. I was still shy about eating new foods. Epstein's strict diet regimens had made me hyper-focused on remaining thin, and even the blandest Asian delicacies, pad thai noodles say, seemed off-putting. But Robbie was encouraging, and for him, I tried to be brave. Thai beer was cheap, and the sun was hot. Truly, we were in paradise. As we lay around on the sand, Robbie and I began really getting to know one another. He told me about his parents, and Antonina and Frank. His dad had once worked painting and refurbishing fishing boats, but now the family ran a catering business in Sydney.
Robbie told me about his older siblings, 2 brothers, Gaetano, who everyone calls Guy, and Frank Jr., and his sister, Angela. Robbie had dropped out of high school because he was bored, he said, though he'd later finished a year through a correspondence course. At 17, he'd moved out of his parents' house and lived a few years with a Korean woman who became his fiancée, despite her parents' objections. I stayed longer than I needed to, he said of that relationship. Indeed, while he never lacked for female companionship, Robbie tended to be a one-woman man, not a player. He said he'd always prided himself on having close women friends, and he was often the bloke who gave these Sheilas romantic advice. My new husband had strong opinions, I was learning, but also understood that people moved at their own pace. To be a bully basher, you must have a sixth sense for spotting vulnerability, but Robbie's response, the polar opposite of Epstein's, was to help, not to hurt. Robbie asked more about my family and my upbringing too, and bit by bit, I divulged the ugliest parts of my childhood. As I described what my father and Forrest had done to me and what my mother had failed to do in response, I saw anger in Robbie's eyes. All families have their difficulties, his face said, but this was beyond the pale. Where were your brothers? He demanded, clearly imagining how he would have reacted if his sister had been so mistreated. I explained that Danny was sent away to boarding school and that Skydie was a kid too small to defend me. And besides, neither of them knew because I'd never told them. Robbie just shook his head, then opened his arms wide to envelop me in a hug.
At one point, I asked Robbie if he believed in God. God is like the wind, he said, explaining how reading about paganism had taught him to see God in nature. Can you see the wind? No, but you can feel it when it brushes your cheek. Did I believe in God? I couldn't answer that. I'd always been comforted by the idea of reincarnation because it promised that my piss-poor excuse for a life was not the only one I was going to get. But God, I wasn't sure. Hadn't Forrest, one of my earliest abusers, invoked God to manipulate me, just as the counselors at Growing Together had done? In my experience, God had been wielded by others to get what they wanted. Still, meeting Robbie at the very moment I needed him most seemed the best evidence I'd ever had of the existence of something divine. Lying in the sand on that pristine island, exchanging stories about our lives and our beliefs, we covered a lot of ground in a short time. For example, we talked about how Robbie's spirituality dovetailed with his interest in fighting. He'd grown up watching Monkey Magic, a wacky cult Japanese TV show that played on Australian TV every Sunday night. From the moment he discovered the show, whose titled character is an ape, a skilled fighter, and the king of his tribe, who achieves enlightenment through martial arts, Robbie was fascinated with the Buddhist concept of satori, the sudden comprehension of one's true nature. The nature of Monkey was irrepressible, said a voiceover in the show's opening montage, and Robbie could relate. That his spiritual awakening owed such a debt to a badly dubbed 1980s TV series could be seen as funny, he knew. But hey, he said, you take your illumination wherever you can find it.
Martial arts is not just about fighting, he told me. It's a way of thinking, a way of life. Robbie was fascinated by the idea that through intense physical conditioning, you could prepare yourself for anything. One of my teachers was all about controlling your punches, Robbie told me. You were not allowed to land a hit. You had to stop an inch away from your opponent's face. Instead of dominating them with your force, you blocked their blows and let them wear themselves out. We used to take broken bottles and scrape our shins so that after a while we couldn't feel anything. My body got conditioned to the point where if someone hit me, I'd just look at them and smile. I'd never set foot inside a boxing ring, but I understood at least a version of what Robbie was talking about. Shoring yourself up to increase the odds of your own survival. I'd spent my life blocking the blows of others, wishing they'd tire of abusing me. And at least for a while, I'd gotten good at blotting out feelings while keeping a smile plastered on my face. Robbie's experience helped me look at my own from a different vantage point. I flashed on the mantra I learned at ITM, the Pali prayer in which we asked to attain the knowledge of all nature. Was this how I would do that? Not just knowledge of the world around me, but of my internal self. I sensed that I was beginning a process that would not be easy. One thing, though, it could not have been easier, hanging out with Robbie. Being with him never felt like a chore. Despite our differences, we seemed to move at the same rhythm. He introduced me to an Australian rock band called Powderfinger, and I fell in love with their biggest hit, whose lyrics, "My happiness is slowly creeping back. Now you're at home. If it ever starts sinking in, it must be when you pack up and go. Described to a T the feeling of pining for a lover who's far away.
I told Robbie I never wanted to be far away from him. One night, I told Robbie there was something I needed him to help me do. First, we went to a bar in Koh Phangan so I could sip a little liquid courage. I think I've told you that Jeffrey Epstein prohibited tattoos. I said, taking a swallow of Thai whiskey. Robbie nodded. He had a yin and yang symbol on his right shoulder that I admired, but he knew I didn't have any ink. Well, there's a tattoo parlor next door, and I need you to come with me and hold my hand. A few minutes later, I told a Thai tattoo artist what I wanted and where I wanted it, and then lay face down on a table. Soon, I had a blue butterfly to symbolize the freedom of flight, and the words, "In love with Robbie G," on the small of my back. Actually, the artist misspelled Robbie, using only one B. To this day, in my phone, my husband's contact number is filed under Robbie with one B. In my mind, my new tattoo accomplished two goals. First, declaring my commitment to Robbie for all the world to see. And second, guaranteeing that I would repulse Epstein, who shunned tattooed girls. As I told Robbie, only half joking, this is an insurance policy, because now Jeffrey wouldn't want me, even if he could make me come back. We must have been at the Two Sons for about a week when Matt showed up for a visit. Back in Chiang Mai, Matt had first been worried when he heard how quickly Robbie and I planned to wed. He thought Robbie's parents would kill him for not somehow slowing us down. Robbie had always had a way with the ladies, Matt knew. I don't think I've ever known him to be single, he'd tell me later.
But Matt could see that Robbie's and my connection was deeper than those he'd witnessed before. So Matt had stood up for us at that mountaintop temple, and now he had arrived to make sure all was well. You know how you can learn a lot about people by the company they keep? From ITM, I already knew that Matt had a kind of way about him. But to see Matt and Robbie together showed me a different side of my new husband. They teased each other relentlessly, but with affection. Matt had a rough upbringing after his parents' divorce. He left his mother's home at 15 and moved to Sydney in search of his father. After he and Robbie met, Robbie's family had eventually taken Matt in. They'd been friends ever since. We were on the beach drinking beer when Matt turned to Robbie with a serious look on his face. "Do you think it's a coincidence, Rob?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" Robbie said. "Petra," he said, and I watched Robbie's mouth drop open. Robbie is a talker. It's usually hard to get a word in edgewise around him, but now he was mute. And his tan brown face had gone a little pale. "Who's Petra?" I asked. Matt looked at Robbie and, after getting a nod of approval, turned to me. "You know by now that Rob is a searcher," he began. "Well, about 2 years ago, we heard about a psychic named Petra who lived out in Campbelltown. That's west of Sydney. Friends told us she was the real deal. Matt was reluctant to go see her," he said, "but not because he doubted her powers. He had an aunt who could see the future, so he knew such people existed. For a variety of reasons, however, he didn't want to know what life had in store for him."
Robbie, though, was gung-ho. He couldn't wait to track Petra down. "So what did Petra say?" I asked. "She and Rob would travel a long distance," Matt said, "to meet a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who would be his only one." I couldn't believe it. I turned to look at Robbie, who was shaking his head. "I'd forgotten, mate," he stammered, clapping Matt on the shoulder. Then he took a deep breath and turned back to me. He was still processing the memory. "There's more to this story," Robbie said. "Right before Matt and I left for Thailand, another good mate of mine asked me to be the best man at his wedding. When I told him I'd already bought my ticket to Bangkok, he tried to persuade me to push the trip back a month. But I said no. I don't know why, I told him, but I've just got to go now. So now I'm realizing why. If I'd come a month later, I wouldn't have met you." This was like a fairy tale, I thought, as Robbie took my hand and held it. "I told you I believe in us, baby," he said. "I believe we are meant to be." Apparently, though, we were also meant to face adversity together. Robbie and I had befriended a charming 19-year-old Canadian, one of several travelers from all over the world who were staying at the Two Suns. After Matt said goodbye, promising to reconnect with us soon in Australia, we invited the Canadian to join us one night to party inside our bungalow. We thought he was terrific until the next morning when we discovered most of our money was gone. Robbie ran outside half-dressed and raced to the raised structure where the Canadian had been staying, but on the way he encountered two Irish women who told him the guy had booked it out of there just after sunrise.
We were out more than $2,000. We had only 200 or so left. Months later, Robbie would say that the robbery was a blessing. It was time to get out of holiday mode and come down to earth, to get back into real life, he'd say. But in that moment, we panicked. The robbery meant our honeymoon was over, obviously. But worse than that, while Robbie had already bought his return ticket to Australia, I had no ticket to fly, and now we couldn't afford to buy one. Robbie called his parents. I'm sure they were wondering who was this woman who'd bewitched their son and who was now stranded with him, nearly penniless on a remote tropical island. But they stepped up to help us, as they would do so many times in the coming years, paying $800 for my flight to Sydney and sending a little money to tide us over until we got there. We packed up and told the Two Suns goodbye, retraced our steps from our honeymoon paradise to Bangkok, and then checked into a dingy, dirt cheap backpackers hotel to await our departure. There was one glitch in the plan. Robbie's parents had not been able to get me on his direct flight, so we'd be traveling separately. My flight would leave a few hours earlier than his did and would connect through Singapore. Realizing this, I was filled with dread. I'd come to rely on how secure Robbie made me feel. The next day, as Robbie walked me to my gate at Bangkok International Airport, I didn't want to let go of his hand. I'll see you on the other side of the world, Robbie said, grinning. I tried to smile too, but I didn't completely succeed. We kissed goodbye, and I got on the plane.
It turns out I was right to be nervous. When I landed in Singapore and tried to make my way to my connecting flight, customs officials descended upon me. If I was not an Australian citizen, they wanted to know why did I only have a one-way ticket into the country. Where, they demanded, was my travel visa to Australia. I had no idea I needed one. Maxwell had always handled those matters for me before. I was almost hysterical with fear. If they sent me back to Bangkok, I didn't know what I'd do. I thought of the time back in Florida when Tony stole the tip money and got me fired, and I'd had no choice but to go crawling back to Epstein. Was this going to be like that, a brief escape followed by a pitiful return to purgatory? In my despair, I yearned for Robbie, who by this point was somewhere above the South China Sea. But I was going to have to figure this out on my own. I don't ever think I've been more persuasive. It helped that I was telling the authorities the truth, that I just married an Australian citizen. I showed them the 7 strings around my wrist. Where was the marriage license, they wanted to know. Of course, I didn't have one. Later, we'd end up having to get remarried in Australia to make our union legal. But I pulled out several of the photographs Matt had taken with my fund saver, feeling grateful that I'd hurried to get them developed. The customs officials looked at the photos, then back at me, and then a miracle. They let me get on my connecting flight. 8 hours later, I arrived in Sydney and stepped into the terminal feeling both exhilarated and anxious. Robbie's parents were coming to meet us, and since I'd landed before Robbie, I would need to introduce myself. Coming out of the baggage area, I saw an older couple behind a rope, a wiry, white-haired gentleman and a stout, broad-shouldered woman whose round face was framed by an auburn pixie cut.
They looked like the people that Robbie had described. I took a deep breath and headed toward them, forcing a smile. I'm Jenna, I said, extending my hand, which Nina and Frank each shook, nodding politely. Then we just stood there together, not talking, waiting for Robbie. I'd soon learn that Frank spoke little English, but I didn't know that then. How awkward. So the silence made me worry they already disapproved of me. Finally, after what seemed like an hour but was only a few minutes, I glimpsed Robbie walking toward us down a long hallway. Relief washed over me. Slipping under the rope separating us from the passengers-only area, I sprinted until I was in his arms. We made it together. Now our life could truly begin. I just have to say, the more we read this book, the more I feel oddly connected to this girl, because the chapter started out with her talking about, with her quoting the Eminem song. You better own it, you own it, you know, the music, you better never let it go. I used to listen to that song before every job interview or big moment I had. And I know it sounds totally cringy and geeky and weird, but I did. I swear to God, I would sit in my car before I would make time. I would make sure that I made time to sit in my car and allow that song to pump me up. And it did. I mean, I got so many amazing jobs doing that. It wasn't just jobs. It was like, you know, consulting work as well. Like if I was about to go in for a big contract or something, it worked. I got a lot of good work.
You can thank Eminem.
Yeah.
That's amazing, actually.
It's a very empowering song. But and also I was telling people last week when we were reading this, because we were talking a lot about Thailand, and she was talking a lot about, you know, all her travails through Thailand, and I was like, I'm super hungry for Thai food now, and I totally
right.
That
I know. I know. I was thinking the same thing. I gotta, order Thai food tonight.
Well, luckily I had Thai food last night, so I don't have to have Thai food again today. But I mean, Thai food is one of the best cuisines. I swear,
it is. I agree.
It's so good, but it's I don't know. It's just really interesting to hear her transition from her. I just think it's almost miraculous how she got out of that life with Epstein. It's like they're
Absolutely.
slowly slipping away. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it truly seems like a miracle.
Yeah. So very brave.
Yeah.
All right. So your turn to read now.
Okay. 19, Down Under. When I picture myself during my first few days in Australia, I have to laugh. I am standing behind the stove in my in law's kitchen, learning how to make coffee the Italian way, one strong cup at a time. I pour water into a tiny silver percolator, then spoon finely ground coffee into the sieve like reservoir through which hot water will soon flow. It's a cozy scene, except for what I'm wearing, a skimpy undershirt and Daisy Duke cutoff shorts with my thong underwear protruding from the waistband. To see me, you might think I'm trying to show off my body, but that isn't right. While in Epstein's employ, I'd been encouraged to wear clothes that made me look even younger than I was. Now, no longer Epstein's captive, I was a wife, a grown woman, but I still felt and dressed like a teenage girl. I didn't have the slightest idea how an adult version of me should look. When I moved into Frank and Nina's house, that was just the beginning of what I didn't know. I had never loaded a dishwasher, for example, or scrambled an egg, or separated laundry into darks and lights. I'd never opened a bank account, or filed income taxes, or made a good cup of coffee. The list went on and on. Sometimes the weight of my ignorance overwhelmed me. What is adulthood, I wondered, and will I ever master it? What is it to be a wife? It would take time for me to figure out the answers.
Our first weekend in Australia, Robbie took me camping in Hunter Valley, north of Sydney, with a group of his friends. The place is one of the country's major wine regions, but we had so little money that Robbie decreed we were there to rough it and enjoy the natural beauty, not to sip Shiraz. I was good with that until I saw where we were sleeping, a ramshackle shed. That weekend was quite an introduction to my new country. Yes, we saw a few Aboriginal cave paintings, but the weather was freezing, and the only kangaroo we spotted appeared to have been dead for months. Oh my God. A few days after our return, I felt terribly ill with some sort of flu. When I spiked a fever, Robbie was at work. He'd gotten a construction job. I felt awful, clammy, and hot. I didn't want to be a pain in anyone's ass, and especially since I just learned the Aussie phrase having a whinge, complaining for no reason. I was determined to be stoic. But when Robbie's dad discovered how sick I was, he swung into action, whipping up his special zuppa di lentici, or lentil soup. I was too weak to get out of bed, but Frank propped me up on my pillows and then sat beside me, feeding me spoonfuls until I was full. Later, as I passed in and out of sweaty, delirious sleep, he returned every few minutes to cool my forehead with a damp cloth. When my fever broke, Frank brought me coffee that was creamy from the raw egg he'd stirred into it. After I'd recovered, Frank sat with me and showed me how to peel a prickly pear, teaching me to avoid the nettles, which will embed themselves like a fiberglass in your fingers if you aren't careful. He didn't say much, just as Robbie had warned me that he wouldn't, but in those first weeks that I was in Sydney, Frank gave me more nurturing than I ever got from my own father.
The women of the Giuffre clan were more skeptical of me. Robbie's mom, especially, is blunt and quick to call out wrongdoing. And at first, she was suspicious of the skinny American who'd crash landed on her doorstep. Then, just before Christmas, Nina took me to the home of some of Robbie's aunties, or Zias. It was cannoli making day, and I was being drafted to help. I knew nothing about making cannoli, of course, but I quickly figured out the assembly line, pounding out the dough, then rolling it thin and wrapping it around bamboo poles that we dipped into a fryer, taking care not to burn them. Then we stuffed the crispy shells with 3 kinds of fillings: ricotta, vanilla cream, and chocolate. We must have made 300 cannoli that day, and when I returned home, I had ricotta in my hair. But I'd passed some sort of test. The Zias were proud of me. Married life took some getting used to. I couldn't get a work permit until we were legally married, which we would accomplish in January 2003. But already Robbie was working all the time, trying to make good on his promise to provide for me. I helped out when I could with the Giuffre family's catering business, hauling steam trays, doing dishes, waitressing when needed. I like keeping busy and contributing to this family I just joined. But at the same time, I was struggling to come to terms with my new existence. Robbie's and my sex life, for example, I was fiercely attracted to him, but I still sometimes had trouble letting myself fully enjoy being with him in bed. Before Robbie, I'd been a sort of zombie when it came to sex, going through the motions, keeping my true self under a psychic lock and key. I had also been trained to do things that Robbie found downright weird. I remember the first time I jumped out of bed right after we made love, only to return with a warm, wet washcloth.
When I tried to clean Robbie up like Epstein had required me to do, my husband took hold of my wrist. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. "That's not right. Lay down with me instead." I did as he asked, and I never brought a washcloth to bed again. But while this should have been a relief, it also left me confused. That act, however demeaning, had been expected of me for so long, and I'd been praised for it. Now that I wasn't doing it anymore, I was unsure what to do with myself instead. It was difficult just to relax. "What do you like and not like in bed?" Robbie had asked soon after we met. Now, little by little, I began to acknowledge that there were things I wasn't comfortable with. For example, I wasn't wild about giving blowjobs. Too many memories of unwelcome hands pushing on the back of my neck, forcing me to swallow, and receiving oral sex only reminded me of my dad. This was a lot for Robbie, hearing how much my past abusers had ruined me, and also for him. When he first realized how much I was effectively removing from the menu for our intimate life, Robbie looked a little stunned, but he made it okay. There were lots of ways to make each other feel good, he told me, as we lay around in bed. "I want you to feel loved," he said. I did feel loved most of the time, but then my past would intervene. I didn't want to think about the billionaires, the prime minister, and all the others, but sometimes during sex, a contorted face would pop into my head and I'd remember. This was awful in myriad ways, experiencing flashbacks in the first place, obviously, but also trying to shield Robbie from knowing it was happening.
I wanted both to protect him and at the same time to keep him from knowing how damaged his new wife really was. But whenever Robbie got an inkling that I was trying to hide something, he felt as if I were shutting him out. We were a team, he said. We needed to deal with these things together. I knew that made sense, but at times that kind of wide open togetherness was more than I could handle. While we were still living with his parents in Sydney, Robbie, knowing how much I missed Mary Jane, the chow chow I'd left in Florida, bought me a Jack Russell Terrier. I named him Champion, Champ for short, and he gave my days structure. Like any dog, Champ needed to be walked, which got me out of the house, but his unrelenting Jack Russell brain also demanded that I engage with him constantly. I couldn't just retreat into my own memories. Champ wouldn't allow it. Being driven by the needs of others was familiar to me, but Champ, that was a healthy impulse. Robbie and I had always planned to move out of his parents' home eventually, but Champ's arrival hastened that decision. Frank and Nina were from the old country, so they believed animals should be kept outside. My need to have Champ on my lap, at the table, in our bed, made them crazy. So in early 2003, Robbie and I moved into our first apartment in Parramatta, a bustling, artsy, multicultural neighborhood. The walls of our tiny two-bedroom second floor walk-up were thin. I remember how lovely Indian next-door neighbors had a new baby whose cries we heard at all hours. I'm also sure they heard Robbie and me fighting. Too often, usually after drinking too much, we'd go at hammer and tong. "Why didn't I clean the house?" he'd yell when he was working so hard.
"Why couldn't he come home earlier?" I'd scream when he knew I was lonely. Sometimes he'd call me on his lunch break and I'd just be waking up. "What are you doing? Just faffing around." I love that. Faffing. That's a great one. "Just faffing around," he'd ask, using Aussie slang for wasting time. "Jenna, are you acting like a child?" That made me angry. But the truth was that in some ways I still was a child. A perfect example. We were so poor that at first we couldn't even afford a sofa, but Robbie scrimped and saved. And one morning before he left for work, he gently nudged me awake. "I know how much you love shopping," he said, stroking my face. "Go out today and buy us some furniture." He handed me $1,000 in cash. "This won't get us much. You'll probably need to go to a secondhand store, but it'll be a start." That night when he came home, I proudly showed him what I bought us, an Xbox game console. Jenna, are you kidding? Robbie said, trying not to laugh or explode or both. I thought it'd be fun, I said. It comes with 2 controllers so we can play together. But we have nowhere to sit, Jenna. What were you thinking? I felt embarrassed and defensive. What was I thinking? Is that all you do is work? I fumed. What I was thinking is that all you do is work. I fumed. I was just trying to bring us some laughter into the house. What I didn't say, because I was ashamed to admit it, was that the thought of going to a furniture store alone had paralyzed me. I didn't know how to shop for furniture because I'd never seen anybody do it. I was afraid of doing it wrong.
So I'd blown all of our money on something I knew how to buy, a toy. The fact was that I was unprepared to run a household. One morning, I came into the kitchen and encountered the hugest spider I'd ever seen, just enjoying itself on the wall next to the sink. I can deal with many things that make other people squeamish. Worms don't scare me, snakes are a breeze, but spiders, ever since Forrest and my dad took me to see arachnophobia with them, I've been deathly afraid. So I called Robbie at work and I said I needed him to come home. I'm sorry, sweetie, he said, sounding distracted. I can't leave. But it's looking at me, I pleaded, risking a glance at the spider's many eyeballs. Is it a huntsman? He asked. What's a huntsman? I practically screamed. Robbie explained. The huntsman spider, also known as the giant crab spider, looks a little like a tarantula, but bigger. And of course, one of the places on the planet that the huntsman spider thrives is Australia. The monster I was having a staring contest with looked as big as a dessert plate. It's a huntsman, I said, hoping that would motivate Robbie to come save me. But he just laughed. Darling, you could sleep next to that spider, he said. It's ugly, but it won't hurt you. Well, that did nothing to reassure me. So I hung up on Robbie. And called his dad, who came right over with a broom. I'll kill it for you, he said valiantly. I'll kill it dead. And soon the huntsman was no more. I wish my own father had treated me with similar care. Sometime in this period, I got Dad on the phone. He and my mom had separated. They'd had many problems, but now I was hearing that Mom had discovered that Dad liked to dress in women's clothes.
Oh, gosh. That was it. They were headed for divorce. They'd sold the Rackley Roadhouse where I'd grown up, and my mom had moved to Colorado. But Dad was still living in Florida, so I asked him to get my Dodge truck back from Tony and then sell it for me. I was hoping it would fetch several $1,000s. I also asked Dad to pawn or sell everything in a storage locker I'd rented. Among other things, the locker contained a chandelier and a few antiques my grandma Shelley had left me. Dad agreed and said, wire me the proceeds. But this was my father, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that when I went to collect the wire, all he'd sent me was $500, a fraction of what he'd likely been paid for my things. That was a problem for a lot of reasons, not least of which was that I was still kicking an expensive habit, Xanax, that I used to help blot out my trauma. Back in Laos, I dumped most of my supply in a toilet because I feared that being apprehended with drugs might get us thrown in jail. But I still had a small stash, and it was running out. Not that I admitted this to Robbie. While I'd been honest with my husband about the range of damaging expenses I'd endured, I think he expected that the further away I got from these incidents, the better I'd feel. Instead, the opposite seemed to be happening. Memories I'd tamped down for years were now coming up, unbidden in vivid detail. Disturbing images would pop into my head during the day. The black leather studded collar Epstein had choked me with, the greedy, cruel look on the Prime Minister's face as he watched me beg for my life. I was haunted by nightmares, my abusers looming over me, about to pounce, and me unable to get away.
Frequently, I was jolting myself awake with my side of the bed soaked in sweat. I hated waking Robbie up, so I just cuddled closer to him. You okay? He'd mumble. Yeah, just another one of those dreams, I'd say, as he wrapped his arms around me and dozed off again. Nevertheless, I was not yet willing to acknowledge how much pain I was in or how much I'd relied on anti-anxiety meds in the past. The truth was that my Xanax pills had been like life rafts for me, and getting off them revealed how quickly I was sinking. One day, Robbie came home from work and found me sitting on the floor in the corner of our apartment, surrounded by blood and broken glass. I had been cutting myself, not trying to kill myself, but instead using the clarity of inflicting my own pain to quiet my raging demons. Robbie took one look at me and called his mother. He told me later that he could just tell by the look in my eyes that this was a mom moment. When Nina arrived, she swooped me in like a bosomy angel, kicking the shards of glass away and taking me into her arms. She must have held me for an hour, rocking me, telling me it would be all right. Then she took me to the bathtub, stripped off my clothes, and tenderly washed me as if I were her own child. Once again, Robbie's parents were giving me what I'd been missing since I was a tiny girl. I would have understood if Robbie had felt angry about how utterly I was falling apart, but he was more sad than mad. Sometimes he'd reference the roller coaster that we were riding together by joking that when we first got married, he didn't know me from a bar of soap. But he was usually hugging and kissing me when he said something like that. He constantly told me how lucky he felt to have found me.
Still, I knew he was frustrated, and so was I. Often I felt as if I were moving 2 steps forward, 1 step back. As I put distance between my abusive past and my non-abusive present, I could at times feel waves of peaceful energy and hope. But then that serenity did something I wished it wouldn't. It was as if my feeling safe cleared a path for some of the most awful memories, ones that I'd locked away for years, to come to the forefront of my mind. When you're fighting for survival, you don't process trauma, you bury it. Well, now that I was surrounded by love, all that ugliness had decided it had been buried long enough. Memories of Epstein tortured me. He'd been so particular about how girls looked, always reed thin, with small breasts and narrow hips. The eating disorder I developed in childhood was only encouraged under Epstein's roof, where us girls were always on a diet. By contrast, the Giuffres not only loved to eat, they loved to feed each other. "I'll cook for you, sweetheart, and you'll cook everything I cook," Robbie promised. When he discovered that my diet consisted of 3 things, pizza, buttered toast, or nothing, it would take years, though, for Robbie to win that battle. At Robbie's recommendation, I tried to read a few spiritual books that he swore held some answers. I saw immediately why he liked The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, a book that changes lives. Dan Millman's 1980 autobiographical novel that endorses meditation, mindfulness, and compassion and acceptance. It started off with a quote from a collection of Buddhist scriptures. "Warriors, warriors, we call ourselves. We fight for splendid virtue, for high endeavor, for sublime wisdom. Therefore, we call ourselves warriors." That made going into battle sound like a sacred act.
I also tried to read Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach, the Jonathan Livingston Seagull guy. That one was just too woo-woo for me. I told Robbie, these kinds of books love to talk about seeing colors and auras and rainbows, but I'm just trying to figure out my next step. I drew more comfort from being outside. Robbie's dad had a huge fig tree in the backyard that he was very proud of. In the late spring, the fruit was abundant, not to mention delicious, but more resonant to me was how the tree changed with the seasons. Sometimes there were so many figs they fell to the ground, creating a fruit carpet that squished underfoot. Other times, the tree looked almost naked. Whenever we visited Robbie's parents, I took a moment with that tree. It became a symbol of resilience for me. When we had arrived in Australia, I insisted upon an unlisted phone number. Even with my new last name, I suspected Epstein and Maxwell could find me if they wanted to, and I wanted to take every precaution. And those precautions were working, at least for the time being. Still, while I had no direct connection with Epstein, he intruded. One day I walked by the living room as my mother-in-law was watching television. There on the screen was an actress who once been one of Epstein's victims, like me. Now there she was on Nina's TV. "How do you know her?" Nina asked, seeing my stunned face. I didn't know what to say, so I turned and left the room. Then in March 2003, Vanity Fair magazine published a lengthy profile titled The Talented Mr. Epstein. I don't remember exactly when I first read it, but I do recall being shocked by its gushing tone. Epstein was described as good-looking, charming, very generous, and like a king in his own world. His Manhattan townhouse was like someone's private Xanadu.
There was a reference to Epstein's love of women, mostly young, and a description of his complicated past, a reference to some of his questionable financial dealings. But the article said many people had commented that there is something innocent, almost childlike about him. Oh, is that what you call it? I asked out loud. Innocent? Then I threw the magazine across the room. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So hearing her talk about the intimacy with your loved ones after you've been through that kind of childhood, that's what a lot of people don't think about, how it affects your intimacy and how it affects not just your intimacy but your partner, because there are, each person's abuse is unique, right? And there are unique things that you do and don't want to do because it brings a flashback, or you just have to suffer through it to make your partner happy. And you have to be like, and it's so complicated because sometimes you don't even know that that's why you don't like that act. You don't know that you don't realize it's because you've been abused. You just don't like it. So you don't know how to fix it. So until you go into therapy and really start digging into why don't I like being intimate in that way with my partner, you don't know how to deal with it. And you don't understand how it's affecting your relationship.
Right.
It's so that's why this is so, I feel like this is so important of a topic, and one that just goes so fucking deep,
Right. I mean, I can see, Robbie came along and sort of saved her. So he was, the knight in shining armor. And it felt at the time that, she was going to just separate from Epstein. This was the answer. She was going to go, on her way and be married in Australia and start a new life. And then all of this shit starts creeping back in. And affecting her, and the past just catches up with her, and it's horrible. It's horrible to have to live in that, in your head, to live with what happened before, but trying to make the current and present situation okay, and being so young and not knowing how to resolve it.
And he's not equipped to deal with it.
No.
And vexatious pirate, that part. Can't even imagine how helpless it must feel to see someone who abused you lauded and praised in public like a damn hero. Right. It happened for so long and with so many people, and for, I'm disowned from a family member because because of the same type of thing. Okay. Because I'm like, how can you worship this person who's accused of rape? Okay.
Right.
And that it's the same fucking thing. And it's, that person isn't accused of rape of me, but like I have the same, I have a history of abuse, and this person has abused women, and you're going to worship that person.
Right.
And now you're going to disown me because I don't like that. You know what I mean? That's really, 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 that's such betrayal. And no, I can't imagine. If I were her, I would have done much more than thrown the magazine across the room.
Right. Yeah.
And I just, it was Vicky Ward who wrote that piece from Vanity Fair. She's been very vocal about how dismayed she was, because she she was approached by the farmer sisters about, like, she had talked to the farmer sisters about his abuse before submitting that piece, and they took all of that out because he threatened her and Graydon Carter, the editor, many times. He basically threatened their lives, and they took it out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there were so many different types of cover-ups of his behavior, not only in the government but by the press. It's like a complete systemic failure. That's why I'm so angry about this whole situation.
Right.
Absolute, because I had an entire career working with the press and had a great experience with them. And then but have been, now we see they've completely fucking failed us.
I was just going to say, I think we probably worked in media around the same time, or at least when there was integrity still in, corporate media, those companies that, we all know who they are.
Yeah.
And of course now, we know that they're influenced greatly by money, by powerful people who, can make things different and I guess, sort of spin stories in the way that they want. And it's so sad to me to see that, because all of the publications I worked with, we held on very tightly. I worked closely with the editorial team, and, the integrity was like that was your DNA, right?
Yeah.
If you didn't, do a review, report something accurately, have integrity, you couldn't be bought. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of companies would try to throw these junkets and have the editors, go to Hawaii or some tropical place just to get on their good side. But a lot of them wouldn't go because they knew it was sort of buying into that. If I do this, then you're going to expect something good from me. And I'm not going to promise you that.
Yep.
You don't see that anymore, I don't think. I mean, rarely. But
I'm
anyway.
not sure because I don't deal with the media anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure. But in my experience, it was like crossing, it was
church and state.
Yeah, it was church and state. I mean,
Right.
I do think that there are media organizations that won't cross that barrier, but
I do too.
But the social media is so powerful now that you can buy social media journalists.
Absolutely.
No question about that. You can buy social media influencers, and a lot of them get more views and have more clout than the
networks. Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah.
And it's sad. Well, anyway, you know what? My dog has been sitting here driving me crazy for the better part of an hour.
Steve.
That's why I named him Steve, so I could say, Steve, sit, Steve. Right now, Steve.
Yeah, my dogs were like insane today. I don't know what's going on. It must be, the moon or some kind of thing happening, but they're crazy.
I mean, I did all the things that you need to do with a dog before you expect him to just be quiet for an hour or whatever, but he's
not having it.
It's a nice day out. So.
Yeah. Well, you go enjoy it.
Yeah, you too. Okay. I'm glad you're back. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to be back. It's so much better reading this with you than, I was catching up on the chapters, just reading to myself. And it was like, this is not the same. I'm not getting it. I'm not, digesting it the same way when I just read to myself. So thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for lending your beautiful voice.
Aw.
Wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.
Yes, you too. I'll talk to you next weekend, hopefully.
Okay. Sounds good. And thank you, chat, for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you around the tube.
See you. Bye.
Bye.